What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? Esoteric Eddie here. Sorry for the delay. Yo, can you guys hear me? Just want to make sure this is good to go. But I'm going to be getting into 5 things that I taught you this past year in 2023. So we'll get to that in a second here. But anyway, give me a like real quick if you can hear me. I just want to make sure that you can hear me. All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So let's get this going. So it's been a crazy year, a wild year for all of us, I'm sure. This has been a very spiritual year for me. I've expanded mentally, spiritually, physically in so many ways. I started off the year living in Arizona, going through a divorce. So that was kind of like the kicker to this literal change in my life, this major change in my life that was going to lead me down this path. So it was literally a transition from getting out of this 11-year long relationship. I was living in Arizona. That was new to me. I'm not from Arizona. I was there for a year, and then leaving there, coming back to California. It was just been a very transitory year, and looking back at this year and all the content that I made, I brought a lot of heavy stuff this year to the world, to all of you. And so I just want to review 5 things that I taught you this year, 5 pieces of content that I brought to you, and just to refresh your memory and remind you of what it is that you learned here at Esoteric Eddie TV. And I'll start off with the Committee of 300. So I'm not sure how many of you actually watched that documentary, but that was a heavy one, man. Like I really went in. I went super in on that one. It's probably one of the most detailed documentaries I ever made, and it's probably one of the most important. So in the documentary, The Committee of 300, I basically detail and chronologize the process of globalization and how these globalist elitists, um, got us into this new world order system that we're in today. How we got there, and it's an amazing documentary. And the process of making it was arduous. Of course, I mean these documentaries, these 1 hour documentaries that I make, man, they take me sometimes a month. Sometimes it takes a month from start to finish for me to be able to bring you 1 hour of content. So I hope you appreciate it, And but in that documentary, The Committee of 300, what I learned and what I taught you, and what you learned is that this idea of globalization, although people have been wanting to take over the world since time immemorial, beginning with Nimrod or whatever, but the modern concept and the modern process of globalization started with Cecil Rhodes in the late 19th century. Cecil Rhodes and his Round Table Group. And so Cecil Rhodes was an imperialist, an internationalist, a globalist before the globalists were a thing. And he, of course, took over Southern Africa and abused its gold mines and extracted insane amounts of gold from South Africa. And with that gold, was able to create a foundation, the Round Table Group, and the purpose for that group was to have a foundation of funds and finances that they could use to then go around and create institutions around the world that would slowly take over the world. So globalization kind of started with Cecil Rhodes, and it was Cecil Rhodes was very vocal about this. He wrote in a lot of his diaries and writings that he wanted to expand the British Empire, and he wanted the British Empire to take over the world. And so we're still kind of seeing that play out. But more specifically, in the 20th century, we started to see a lot of the Industrial Revolution and a lot of the internationalists be birthed and start to really form globalization in the form that we have it today. Um, starting with, well, not starting with, but one major player of this was the Club of Rome, right? So the Club of Rome. Well, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. So um, this idea of the Committee of 300, right? We're told by in the truther community, or we have been told that there's this Committee of 300, right, that runs the world, that rules the world, and that idea came from John Coleman, Dr. John Coleman, who was a writer, a conspiratorial writer, and he wrote a book called titled the Committee of 300. And I remember I've heard that term throughout these years, mostly from like Alex Jones and stuff like that. But I remember when I was living in Arizona, I came across his book and I was like, "Oh, this looks super interesting. I gotta have this." So I went up to the, but there was no price on it. It was at a used bookstore. So I went up to the cashier. I was like, "Hey, how much is this book?" And I was assuming it was gonna be like $5 or something, but she looked it up and she's like, "Oh wow, like this is like worth $100 or $200, something crazy." And I was just like, "Oh damn, I don't have that much to spend right now." But once she said that, I knew like, okay, dude, this is like some really heavy stuff. Like I need to look this up. So I ended up looking up the PDF and reading the book, and that's what led me down this entire journey of creating the Committee of 300 documentary. So the Committee of 300 idea came from Dr. John Coleman, but the idea of there being 300 men that rule the world came specifically from a man named Walter Rathenau. Walter Rathenau was a liberal um, politician in Germany during World War II, during and after World War II. And he was helping rebuild Germany. But because of his liberal ideals and because of his Jewish background, um, a lot of Nazi-esque people, and nationalists uh, didn't like that. And so eventually he got assassinated. But Walter Rathenau, before he died, said that there were about 300 powerful men who rule the world, that everything in the world is ran by basically 300 men. And so what he knew, what he saw behind the scenes, we'll never know. But that idea of 300 came from him. So Dr. John Coleman's book was very influential on this subject, and we had another book produced on this subject by a member of the elite who admitted that this was true, who admitted that the world's institutions were interlinked, and were working towards a similar goal of globalization. And that book was titled, or is titled, Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley. And Carol Quigley was quoted by Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton quoted Carol Quigley during his 1994 inaugural speech. And he said something about Carol Quigley being his old college professor. So Bill Clinton studied with Carol Quigley. Now, in Carol Quigley's book of Tragedy and Hope, he lays it all out. He exposes the elite who are taking over the world through globalization, but he didn't do it vindictively. He didn't do it to say it as a warning. He did it as um, a piece of admiration. He was praising the globalists in this book, which makes his book even more wild. I mean, this is an insider. He claims that he was given um, permission to study the works and the documents of these people, the people who secretly run the world, for a number of years, and that they give him permission to write this book. So this book of Tragedy and Hope is probably the wildest book ever written when it comes to conspiratorial subjects, because again, it was written by an insider, not to expose them, but to praise them. So that's how you know it's the real deal. And in that book, he again verifies that organizations like the Club of Rome, the Tavistock Institute, and such um, have infiltrated the world with globalization and have created a nexus around the globe of institutions who all seek the same agenda, which is basically to control the populace. And so I taught you all of this in the Committee of 300 documentary. And these early players who were internationalists turned globalists influenced Klaus Schwab. So Klaus Schwab was influenced by these people. He looked up to these people. These were his role models. For example, the Club of Rome um, was one of the first globalization uh, organizations. The Club of Rome was one of the first organizations who sought to globalize the world and infiltrate it um, with their ideals, which would be to control us through the corporatocratic institutions. Oh man, my light just turned off. But anyhow, so the Club of Rome, they published a famous book. It's famous in economics, titled "The Limits to Growth," and this was kind of like the first climate change scare. You know, they were the ones who created the blueprint, pretty much, of the climate change scare and the economic scare that would be used to huddle people into a one world, globalized, centralized government. And so, The Limits to Growth, which is a famous book in economics, basically stated at the time, which was like the 70s, that we only have 100 years left if we keep going down this path. And if we keep going down this economic path, this social, this societal path, that all of our resources will be, expended, and we're all going to die, pretty much. It was just like a doom and gloom book, and it shook the world, and it really got things going down the path of this climate change scare. But the limits to growth was very important for us truthers, because there was a lot in between the lines. And in the limits to growth, they quoted an aristocrat. Um, what's his name? Oh man, I always forget his dang name. Um, Bernard Russell. Well, go watch the Committee of 300 book to find out. But, anyways, in that book, The Limits to Growth, they quote other globalists who have similar ideals of indoctrinating the world into a one world government. And so the Club of Rome was started by Aurelio Pecci, who was a well known internationalist who worked with the Rockefeller Foundation, who was very close friends to Gianni Agnelli, who was the founder of the Fiat Motor Company, which was like the Ford of Italy. So the richest guy in Italy. So yeah, Aurelio Pecci, super sketchy internationalist, and Alexander King, who was a British academician who helped change the education system to a more rigid indoctrination system, which basically just sets the kids up to be workers. So these two men started the Club of Rome, started this climate change scare, and then many decades later, the young and hopeful, maniacal Klaus Schwab started his World Economic Forum. And during the third ever um, meeting of the World Economic Forum, he had Aurelio Pecci be its keynote speaker. So, again, I taught you in this documentary, I showed you in detail how we got to this state of the world with the pandemic and Klaus Schwab. I showed you how globalization formed out of the late 19th century through the 20th century and ended up with Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. I showed you in detail. It is not a conspiracy. These men have clearly stated time and time again throughout their books, throughout their seminars, throughout their works, that they planned to globalize the world through an interspersed, interconnected nexus of institutions who all share the same agenda, which is to control the people through indoctrination. So go check that out if you haven't already. All right. So I also taught you where the famous quote, "We are um, spiritual beings having a human experience," came from. And this was one of my favorite documentaries to make this year. It was the documentary titled "We Are Spiritual Beings Having a Human Experience." That quote came from a Jesuit. believe it or not. It came from a Jesuit by the name of Pierre Teilhard. Pierre Teilhard. And although he was a Jesuit, I would say he was one of the good ones. I studied his life. I made a really awesome documentary on him and his works. And I was surprised to find out all the stuff that I did about him, and that's what's so fun about my work, man, because I'll take just a subject and then dive into it, and I'll learn so much along the way that I didn't know. And so we've all heard that quote. I'm sure we've all heard that quote. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And I've heard that quote my entire journey as an esotericist. I remember reading that book. There was a book by that title written by, oh man, what's his name? Jeez, my memory is really getting bad. Either that or I just have way too much information in my head and it's just kind of like fighting for space at this point. Um, Man, I want to remember his name because this author was one of the very first authors that I got into during my esoteric path back when I was in early high school. But he wrote a book called something in oh there Bob Frisell. Bob Frisell, he wrote a lot of amazing books that were that generally covered all these subjects, conspiratorial, occult, and esoteric subjects. And I first came across his books in early high school, and I read his book titled "The Something in This Book Is True," which has a sequel called "Nothing in This Book Is True." Those are amazing books. I always recommend those books to anybody who asks me, where should I start? He does a great job of generalizing these subjects and giving you a starting position on how to begin to come to that moment of clarity and have that paradigm shift and realizing that our world is not the way we were taught it is. And so Bob Frisell also wrote a book titled We Are Spiritual Beings Having a Human Experience. That was the first time I came across that quote, and I thought it was super awesome. But I never took it upon myself to really find out where that quote came from until this year, 2023. And so I looked it up and I found out it came from this Jesuit named Pierre Teilhard. And so I taught you in the documentary that he was a mystic, very mystical guy, very, very esoteric, and wrote a lot of works on mysticism, on esotericism, on consciousness, on death, and how memory um, can 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 live after death. He wrote about how if we come to self-realization and individualize ourselves and strengthen our consciousness, that our memories can follow us after death. And that was actually pretty wise and wild of him to write because as I've learned through quantum physics, that's actually true. Our memories are basically synonymous with consciousness. And so he came up with that famous quote, "We are spiritual beings having a human experience." But the sad thing is that all of his amazing works on mysticism were not published until after his death. So he wasn't able to see the success of his spiritual work till at all throughout his life. Um, but he was a very accomplished man. He fought in, I believe, World War One or two, or maybe both, one of the two. Excuse me. Dates are the worst for me. But he fought in one of the world wars, and he was a medical officer in the world wars. He had the option to be a military priest, so he could have just had it chill, could have had it lavish, pretty much, and just chill in the church all day long and attend to those who needed the spiritual comfort, religious comfort. But he said no. He wanted to be a medical help. I forgot what the term is, but he wanted to be a stretch bearer. That's what it was. He decided to be a stretch bearer. So he was on the front lines with the men, running back and forth on the front lines, picking up, wounded warriors and stretch bearing them back to the hospitals. And a lot of his peers later wrote about him, and they said that they were just astonished because he had this character about him, this aura about him, this tall Frenchman who showed no fear on the battlefield. I mean, he was just this tall character, just literally walking or running in the line of fire, never being touched ever. And so he just had that divinity within him, that trust in God, and would just walk across the war field and attend to his wounded brothers. Um, And he ended up having a spiritual experience during the war. He said he found an abandoned church, I believe, yeah, abandoned church, and he sat there for a while, and he must have eaten some of that ergo, I think it's called ergot, that wheat that produces LSD. He must have eaten something or whatever, or was just so exhausted that his mind kicked into delirium. But he had a spiritual experience where he basically, and he describes it in his works, where he basically saw everything fractalize and become geometry, that basic psychedelic experience. And he said he was meditating on a portrait of Jesus that he saw in that church, and that um, he said that the edges of the painting became seamless, and he saw everything become interconnected, and he could see how everything was interconnected. And he said that the painting became psychedelic and changed colors or whatever. And in that moment, he realized what consciousness was, and he realized our infinite self, and he realized how we could become eternal and how our memories will follow us after death only if we hone in on our consciousness. Important thing, we have to self-realize, hone in on our consciousness and build that strength. And so, yeah, he had all these wild experiences. And the church actually warned him many times. The Jesuit church warned him many times not to publish his works. They were way too heady. But luckily, they didn't destroy them, and we have them to this day. So, just an awesome guy, awesome guy. And go check out the documentary if you haven't. I taught you again where that quote came from. I mean, how awesome is that? You can go around and, at parties, it's a bar trick. It's a bar trick. People, you'll be like, hey, man, I'm sure you've heard this quote, but do you know where it comes from? Did you know it comes from a Jesuit, a mystical Jesuit? So I taught you that. Um, and of course, I taught you what the crystal lattice mind illusion is. The Crystal Lattice Mind Illusion is my third book, the third book I ever published. Published it this year in 2023. And that book was just a fun ride, also a fun journey. And again, this entire year, man, was a very spiritual one for me, like in so many ways. So many of you heard the story, but for those of you who haven't, my third book came to me as a download. So I I finished writing and publishing my second book, The Anunnaki Theorem. And so I had some time in between that book and the next, and I was like, man, what am I going to write? What's going to be my next project? And I really had no idea. I was thinking I was going to write a book um, on Werner von Braun and how he prophesied and warned about the fake alien invasion, which I still want to write a book on that. I want to write a book on his life and who he was, and I thought I was going to write a book on that, but one day I was doing some work, some plumbing work, because I'm a plumber. For those of you who don't know, I was underneath a sink in a vacant home, and honestly, I got to give a shout out to my. I've never told him this, but I need to give a shout out to my friend Ruben um, from high school, who's always showing love. Shout out to Ruben. Also, the only person who's ever beaten me in a rap battle. And this is a legendary moment that brought shame to my name. But yeah, for those of you who don't know, I used to be a hip hop artist, and we all used to hang out in this field here in my hometown in San Marcos. And I remember I was with these two girls trying to show off. I had these two girls. I was walking around with them all day, and we go to the fields. Of course, we find some hoodlums, some of the homies out there, and we're all drinking, getting high. And me and him uh, break off into a rap battle. And I thought I had it. I'm like, yeah, I got the girls right here. I'm about to show off. No, he proceeds to disgrace me in the most funny of ways, and yeah, beat me in the rap battle that day. But it was destiny, I guess. But anyways, he actually turned me on to the work of Walter Russell, and through his book, The Power of One, I believe it's titled. And so I was on a Walter Russell kick, and I was underneath this sink in this vacant home, doing some plumbing work, actually listening to some Walter Russell, some of his work, a breakdown of his work. And then out of nowhere, I got a flash of what my next book would be. I saw the entire thing in a flash. I saw the colors of the front cover. I saw the title right away, Crystal Lattice Mind Illusion. And although I didn't see all the words exactly, I felt the energies of every chapter, and I just knew in that moment what it was going to be, and I was so excited. I was so excited, and so in this book and documentary, I taught you that consciousness is the actual real driving force of this entire physical universe. And I can go all day long about how and why that is. And I've spoken about it so many times throughout this year in many interviews. But real briefly, what the crystal lattice mind illusion is, and I have a full definition in the book, but I'll paraphrase here. What it is the concept that, first and foremost, our entire physical world is made up of smaller moving units that I call lattices, that we call lattices, that fractalize outward into the macrocosm. But these smaller moving units are actually phasing in and out of existence. And so they are holographic. They are being projected from somewhere, which we can call source, which Jacobo Grinberg, the famous scientist who was experimenting with telekinesis or telepathy, called the hyperfield, all these different things. We can call it whatever you want, but these particles, these lattices, these most minute structures of our physical world are phasing in and out of existence from some other unseen dimension, meaning they are being projected here like light. I mean, they're literally being projected here from some light. So our physical world is being projected from from an unseen dimension, meaning that this entire universe is holographic. And so, in other words, it is a simulation because the entire physical world, as chaotic and random as it may seem, actually runs off of math, equations, and geometry. And I demonstrated this in various ways. One simple example is the fact that we all start off as eggs, circular abstract geometries, which fractalize outward into other geometries. But these seemingly abstract geometries are running off of math and equations because it takes roughly 9 months, give or take the days, for a human to be born. And we just simply overlook that. We overlook the fact that it is a hard set equation. You know, we start off as geometries, we fractalize into a fetus, and we take 9 months for all of this to happen, and then we're born. I mean, everything is run off of math, numbers, equations, geometries, fractalization, all of it. Our entire physical world runs off of these math sets. And so we live in a simulation, we live in a program. Everything is programmed to run the way that it does. So that's the crystal lattice part of it. And again, I go into much more detail about that in the book and documentary. But I also taught you that the about the mind illusion. The mind illusion is the fact that we have a mind and body. Most people only view themselves as one unit. You know, I'm just this person, but that's not true. That's not true because even the body is made up of countless moving parts, billions of moving parts, if you want to count all the cells. And so we have all these different moving parts in the body, but we also have a mind, which, believe it or not, has at least two components as well. The mind is compartmentalized into the conscious and subconscious. And so together, the mind and body create what I call in the book the spiritual machine. And I believe it was our creator's intention for us to utilize this spiritual machine to tap into the crystal lattice and the matrix energy grid work. All around us are energies, unseen energies that I believe we can tap into to produce all sorts of amazing abilities, like self healing abilities. And this is the process that the mystics have been trying to teach us through Kundalini meditation. You know, Kundalini meditation teaches us how to tap into the spiritual machine, how to use the mind and body in conjunction to begin to deliberately activate our regenerative processes within, you know, how to self heal. So I taught you this in the book, in the documentary this year, and I taught you that Alfred Wallace the co-founder of natural selection, later renounced the theory of evolution and renounced that it could explain how the human mind came to be. You know, the school system only teaches you about Charles Darwin, but they don't teach you about Alfred Wallace, the co-founder of natural selection and thus the theory of evolution. They don't want to teach you about him because in his writings that we have to this day, he later renounced the theory of evolution and said, although it could explain how physical adaptations came to be, it simply could not explain the complexity of the human mind and consciousness. And he believed that the mind was separate from the body. And this is what we are starting to understand through quantum physics. And so I taught you this, and you learn this, and you now know this if you follow Esoteric Eddie TV. And again, it's just another bar trick. You know, you could be at a party or whatever, and you could say, hey, did you know that Alfred Wallace, the co founder of natural selection and thus the theory of evolution, did not believe that the mind actually belongs to the body, that they are two separate things? You know, so if you haven't checked out the book, if you haven't checked out the documentary, go check them out because there's a lot in there. I can never fully explain everything in any of these videos, podcasts. You just simply have to read the book, man. It took a lot of months to sit there and read endless papers, PDFs, books, watch lectures. I mean, I listened. When I was driving around doing my plumbing work, I would sit there and listen to university lectures on consciousness. Like I was really trying to understand, okay, what is this thing? What does mainstream academia believe this thing is? And so I got to learn, and you got to learn what mainstream academia believes uh, consciousness is. And they're trying to tell us that it's all just an illusion, that we're just robots, that consciousness is a three-dimensional 360 illusion produced by all of the different um, sensory um, sorry, produced by all of the senses uh, working in conjunction, you know. But that's not true. We know that's not true because if that were true, we wouldn't have an individual self. There would be no need for an individual self. But each one of us is unique in our own way, in our own way. And with that being said, also, like the reason I'm a bit tired right now is because I was up all night having a great time at my first ever healing ceremony that I put together. I've been to many healing ceremonies, but last night I organized and hosted my first ever healing ceremony. It was amazing, and it was just a part of a part of the ongoing serendipities and synchronicities that I've been experiencing this entire year. So I got into healing ceremonies many years ago from one of my cousins, but I was too young and too wild to really appreciate it. But this year I got back into it due to a dear friend of mine who introduced me to the healing community, reintroduced me to the healing community, and I just knew it's something that I wanted to bring to the world. And so um, I met an awesome man who's now a friend who runs this healing facility here in San Diego, and you can learn more about that in my recent interview on the channel titled "Healing Cancer Through Sound Therapy." So I met him through chance, and I come to find he has this facility, this awesome facility based around healing through sound therapy and all kinds of stuff. And he loved my work, and he said, "Yo, like we need to do something. We need to collaborate." So he gave me permission to start hosting events at his facility, and within 2 weeks, it was quite an endeavor. I made the flyer. I put together the event. I found the facilitators. I put together the food, the accommodations, everything. And so from within those 2 weeks, I was able to pull together an amazing team of people, an amazing team of experiencers, of attendees. And last night we all had such a great time. We had some breath work, some sound bowl healing, some live DJ music, and all the people involved were people that I met through this year through synchronicities of through just following my passions, following my heart. And so we had an amazing time. There were several people last night who had major breakthroughs, who released years of trauma. I mean, there was a lot of crying and laughing and just a lot of love last night. So it's been an amazing year. And the crystal lattice mind illusion was a part of that, man. Like I've just been on this spiritual awakening, man. But If you've heard me recently, you know that I don't really see myself as a spiritualist. I see myself more as an existentialist. But I'm definitely an existentialist having a spiritual experience. That is for sure. So I taught you a lot about consciousness, man. I gave you the groundwork in the book and documentary to really start understanding consciousness, understanding the physical world, understanding the simulation we're in, and also understanding the tricks that the globalist elite use to suppress that through the reptilian brain networks. I taught you that depression, for example, is not an emotion. Depression is actually a state of consciousness, an altered state of consciousness that affects your entire body slowly as it infects you. And depression can be induced through the foods that we eat, the entertainment that we consume, the energies that the corporate world produces through its architecture, through its 9 to 5 grind, all these different things. And more critically, we are induced into depression and through the reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain is induced through fear. And boy, were we all in fear for at least 2 years. Many of us were. I wasn't, but many of us were induced into fear for those two, you know what I mean, hectic years. And fear is the quickest way to induce a person into the reptilian brain. And when you operate from the reptilian brain, you are also in an altered state of consciousness. You are in a lowered state of consciousness because now you are operating on a survival state. And so you don't have time to think higher. You're vibrating higher. You are thinking, or sorry, you are vibrating lower. You are thinking lower. And the world around us keeps us in a subtle state of the reptilian brain through all the crazy entertainment, sex, and hunger stuff that it feeds us. And so, yeah, you learned a lot about that. And if you haven't checked out the book or the documentary, go check it out so you can be up to par with where we're at in our world in academia with consciousness, with self healing, and all these different things, so that you can utilize them for the new year. Because the world is changing, man. The world is changing for the better, I believe. You know, the doom and gloomers, the reptilian brain network, will have you believe that it's changing for the worse, but that is not true, man. That is not true. And last night was an example of that. I mean, I was among so many awesome, loving people last night, and we all had the same agenda. We we had the same agenda, you know, which was to bring love to the world. You know what I mean? Let's globalize love, man. Let's globalize self healing. You know, globalization is not a bad thing when we use it for good purposes. You know, um, let's bring the new world aura. Yep. And I got to give credit to my old dear friend. Man, actually, to be honest, forgot his name. We haven't talked in so many years, but he was an old artist friend of mine, and he was working on an album titled "The New World Aura," and I always loved that term. But F the New World Order. Let's bring the New World Aura, baby. Come on. Yep. It's time to globalize self healing. Let's globalize love. So, yeah, I taught you all of that, man. And also, last couple things I'll cover is I taught you that hell is not real. Yep. I know a lot of you are going to be mad about that or upset about it or confused about it, but hell never existed, dude. Hell never existed in the Bible. Um, the entire concept of hell was centered around a place called Gehenna. Gehenna. And Gehenna is the Greek term for the actual Hebrew term, which was Gai ben Hinnom. So whenever Jesus spoke of hell, he used the word Gai ben Hinnom. And Gai ben Hinnom means the valley of the son of Hinnom. And in the Old Testament, this valley was referenced as the place where the Moloch worshippers would practice their sacrifices. So, in the valley of this son of Hinnom is where the worship of Moloch took place. And during these sacrifices, people would sacrifice their children to the altar of Moloch, as we're told in the Bible. by throwing them in a fire. And so later, Jesus described the afterlife for sinners as being like that of those who were punished in Gai Ben Hinnom, in Gehenna. And if you go back and you read his words, he never said that we would be punished forever, that we would be in this eternal state of being punished. He said that we would be destroyed forever, as those in Gai Ben Hinnom were. And that's important because if we understand what consciousness is, what this quantum realm is, what these dimensions are, and what source is, it makes more sense. Because I believe that source is an unfathomable light, and it's not really even light. That's the only thing we could use to describe it. But I believe that source is this light, like fire is, and that it is the fire, the light where souls emanate from, but also go back to be dissolved. And I don't believe that when we die, we go back to source. I believe we either reincarnate here through samsara, which is not a good thing, which is not what we want to be doing, or we elevate to other dimensions, to higher dimensions, to these sort of heavens and somewhat hells, not in the Christian sense, but these demented dimensions. Um, but it all depends on the quality and strength of our self realization and our consciousness. So I believe what Jesus was saying was that those who do not take it upon themselves to acknowledge the Creator, who do not take it upon themselves to find the kingdom of heaven within all these things that the mystics have been speaking about, like Pierre Taylor, that they will simply be dissolved by Source. They will simply be dissolved by the great fire of Source, and their souls will just be exterminated, not punished, but destroyed forever. Even worse than being punished for forever, I believe would be to be exterminated, vanquished, destroyed. Your soul simply just crumpled up and thrown away. And so hell isn't real, man. It never really existed. Jesus was using Guy Ben Hinnom as a reference, a metaphor for something that we couldn't understand quite fully at that point, I believe. And so, with that being said, the last major documentary I made this year was one on Moloch. So I taught you about Moloch, and I taught you that Moloch never actually existed in the Bible either. And if you didn't watch the documentary, go back and watch it. I taught you that Moloch uh, was a reference, complex reference, and that the Jews created the term Moloch as a disrespect to the neighboring kingdoms, because like the Jews, the neighboring kingdoms had what they called meleks, kings, rulers, and the Jews also had their melek. But the Jews, the Israelites, wanted to disassociate from the world around them, and so they came up with a term to degradize the meleks of those around them, and they said, "No, you do not have meleks, you have moleks." They took the same O pronunciation from their word boseth, which means shame, and inserted it into this playful word molech, saying, "You do not have a melech, you do not have a king or a ruler, you have a shameful king, a shameful ruler." And so that's where it first started, right? These molechs. But in anthropology, in actual history, we found that there never was this Moloch, but there were a lot of references to these mulks, these MLKs, because the term mulk is the same root word that the Bible used for Moloch and Melech. And so we have found that root word in actual grave sites around the world. And particularly in these sacrificial grave sites around the world, which we now call Tophets. So we found the root word mulk in these sacrificial, in and around these sacrificial sites where babies were definitely sacrificed by way of fire. But this term mulk wasn't referring to a deity, it was referring to a type of sacrifice. And so all along, these mulks were a type of sacrifice. And crazier than that, I learned and I taught you that the early Israelites were probably sacrificing their children to Yahweh, to the God of the Bible as well. And this is why Yahweh in the Bible had to step in and say, yo, you guys need to stop doing that. But there are instances throughout the Old Testament where this ancient worship by the Jews of sacrificing their children was reflected. For example, Yahweh himself tells Abraham to take his son Isaac and go bind him up and throw him in a fire, a literal mulk sacrifice. And so this was commonplace. This was normal back then. It was normal for people to sacrifice their children by way of fire, which is crazy. I don't know how we ever normalized that, but that normalization was reflected early in the Bible, again, through the story of Abraham and Jacob. And again, normalized in the New Testament when we are told that God took his one and only begotten son and freaking sacrificed him. So yeah, that was all normal back in the day. But Moloch never existed. But more specifically, this idea of the ancient people around the Israelites sacrificing their children to a bull-like deity, I believe actually was referencing the fact that the ancient people would sacrifice their children to the Anunnaki. Because time and time again, what we do find in actual history is reference to these Anunnaki beings like Anu and Enlil as being these bulls of heaven. And we find actual bull statues in ancient Babylon, which were representations of the Anunnaki. So what the Bible was actually saying was that these people were worshiping and sacrificing their children to the Anunnaki, who were represented as bulls in ancient times. And Yahweh might have just been one of them early on in Israelite history. So that was another thing that I taught you. It's been a wild year, man. It's been a wild year, and I'm just so excited for this new year. I'm so excited to see what I can bring to all of you, and I'm so excited for all of you to continue on this journey with me. Excited for all the new people to meet, and yeah, I got a lot in store for this new year. New books to be made, new documentaries to be made, new interviews to bring to you, um, and healing ceremonies, which is going to be a new endeavor of the Esoteric Eddie brand. But I have a new brand that will be heading the ceremonies. If you're on Instagram, go follow the Mente ceremonies. Mente being mind in Spanish, Mente, the Mente ceremonies. That's where you can find the ceremonies that I will be putting together and promoting. I want to bring that international and worldwide. So if you have spaces that we can host this at, if you are a facilitator and want to be a part of it, hit me up. Send me an email at contact@esotericeddie.com or hit me up on Instagram at esotericeddie. But yeah, there's just so much in store. This has been an awesome year. And whatever's going on in this crazy world, don't let them fool you. Don't let them make you think that it's all the end of the world. It might be the end of the old world, but it's just the beginning of a new world, man. It's the new world aura. We got to combat the new world order with the new world aura. You feel me? Yeah, I love you all. I can't thank you enough, honestly, for rocking with me. I got to do like a giveaway too for everybody who's been rocking with me since the Lucifer Mystery Revealed days, because that's what started it all. I will be doing some more giveaways. I need to give back to all of you beautiful people. For those who have been rocking with me since like the Lucifer Mystery Reveal days, shout out to y'all. I got to do like a private meet and greet or something, like, because that's the real core fam right there. But I love all of you who have joined in along the way. Whatever documentary brought you here. Matter of fact, let's have some fun. comment down below. And like honestly, I'm not trying to be a YouTuber. Comment down below just to like kick the algorithm. Like I genuinely want to know. Like please comment down below what it was that brought you to my work. I want to know what documentary, what video, what interview, whatever it is, what is it that brought you here to me? I want to know. That'd be fun to know because for a lot of you, it was the Lucifer Mystery Revealed book. For a lot of you, it was the interview that I did on the Concrete podcast, which was a huge move for me. Also, let me talk a little bit about that. I've traveled the world a little bit now, for my work and because of my work. And I reached out to the Concrete podcast and asked if they, would like to have me on because I saw they had Billy Carson on. So I was like, well, if they could have him on, I'm sure they might be interested in having me on because we do a lot of the same work as far as the subjects we cover. And they had faith in me. They're like, yeah, man, come out. So I flew out to Florida and to be honest, was pretty nervous to do that interview. And I did the interview. We talked for like 2, 3 hours. I don't know. And I honestly didn't like the way the interview came out at first. Like I left the building a little upset, but I'm always like that. I'm self-critical as an artist. I had a great time, but I left the building in this weird haze. I was out there in Florida in this weird haze, like, going back to the airport and everything. I was like, man, I don't know. Like, I feel like I could have done better, like whatever. And a couple weeks go by, and then the interview gets released, and I just get a flood, like a literal flood of just love from every way, all these different platforms, my emails, my DMs, and it brought so many more new people into my life, so many more new opportunities into my life. So like shout out to Concrete, shout out to Danny, which is now the Danny Jones podcast, for having faith in me. And it was awesome. So it's been cool to be able to be a part of all of your lives. It's been awesome to be um, one of your favorite content creators and authors. And so I'm excited for so much more. You know what I mean? Like, it's not over, baby. Like, we're still here. We're still here. There's still so much more to experience and so much more to bring to the world. Let's connect. Let's collab. You know what it is? Esoteric Eddie here. Namaste. Happy New Year. And yes, I know, it's kind of a silly idea to celebrate a circle around the sun, but I always say the seasons have effects on us. The seasons of our lives, the seasons of nature. There's a reason why, as humans, we've been celebrating this forever. It's because there is a truth. There are physical changes we go throughout the year as the seasons around us change, and you can utilize those changes to fuel your life through these transitory phases. So utilize the energy, utilize the celebrations, utilize all of this. And actually, I want to end this by saying um, something that I've realized lately. You can't really make sense of the world. If you try and make sense of the world, it's going to drive you effing crazy. But what you can do is make use of the world. And that's going to be one of my mantras for the new year. I'm going to stop trying to make sense of things. I'm just going to simply make use of things. That's where the power lies, my people. Anyways, love y'all. Namaste. Peace.